So welcome everyone. We are quite excited for our short talk today because we are going to tackle one of the main issues of the region, the Middle East, which from our point of view is crucial to analyze all other aspects from economics to politics to international relations, and that's Arab human development. And we will do so with an absolute expert, which is Professor Bahgat Korany. We're very happy to have him here and very grateful. He's right now teaching at the American University of Cairo, but he's for a very long time been a leading expert in the research about the wider Middle East. So today he will be launching one of his latest projects, the Arab Human Development in this 21st century. And I will be just moderating for your questions.
I teach my students either here in Cairo or in North America international relations, and especially international relations theory. I went into the project of development because I felt that this is where everything starts. I call it a conditioning situation. If you don't deal with the problems of development, you do not actually analyze properly what is taking place in the Arab Middle East, and you cannot predict what is going on. So even if you are talking about the Gulf as part of the developmental problem of what is taking place in the Middle East. The second thing is, and I'll talk much more about that, the provocative thesis of the 10th anniversary volume. Development is not about economics. Development is about politics. And we had a big debate about that with the UNDP, with the UN, and I'll explain to you my point of view, and we can have a discussion about that. My talk will be a sort of funnel-like. I'll go from the overall coming to really the 10th anniversary volume, Arab Human Development report. For the last 40 or 50 years, we have been debating the problems of international order, and there has been a big major debate. The streamline, the main conventional thesis is that international order depends on East-West relations. The Cold War. This is where the world could end because of nuclear weapons. Some specialists in what we call the third world, the global south, contested that aspect. Said yes, nuclear weapons are very important, but there wouldn't be a nuclear war. On the other hand, you have lots of slow death taking place in other parts of the world, and this is a time bomb that is going on. We were vindicated in 1989 with the end of the Cold War. That was a huge debate among specialists in North America. They used to, my colleagues, and I like them, I respect them, they used to call us nationalistic, chauvinistic about the global south, but we were talking really about global problems. And we said, this is what will either save or doom the world. North-South relations, rather than East-West. So, 1989 came to decide the issue. Soviet Union has disappeared. Problems of poverty have not. They continued. And you guys here in Italy and in Europe are seeing the spillover, the refugee problem. So nobody is really saved from developmental problems. There is a spillover, they are global problems. Let me take one issue, and that is the UN has realized that aspect. In the year 2000, they established the Development Millennium Goals. I suppose many of you know about that. And that became at the center of the world. 2015, they pushed the debate a bit further as part of the world transformation, 2030. And they developed the idea of not development millennium goals, but sustainable development goals. So it became a huge centerpiece of international order. A bit overdue, a bit late, but better late than never. So that is, rather than boasting about it, just telling you the debate that was taking place in academia, and I think many of us felt that we were vindicated. Development problems are really the basis of international order. Now, let me come to the main aspect of development. When we started, lots of us started dealing with these development problems, we were somehow dominated by economists. I had a minor in economics in England when I was studying. I have nothing against economics as such, and I feel that this is one of the most serious and mature social sciences in terms of methodology. But we had a bit of reservation about reducing development to per capita income. That's what most economists dealt with. And we felt that this was too simplistic. Not only that the average is misleading, because you hide lots of things when you use the average, but also the per capita income, what does it really measure? Measure a financial aspect, but hides lots more. And we should be all indebted to two Asian scholars, Mahbub al-Haq and Amartya Sen. I don't know if the names are known here, but Mahbub al-Haq worked in the Pakistani origin and worked a lot in the World Bank. Amartya Sen is Indian, an economist. Both of them are economists, by the way. Amartya Sen is actually much more than an economist. He's econometrician, works with mathematical models. Amartya Sen actually taught at Harvard, and he is now the president of Cambridge University and got a Nobel Peace Prize for his ideas about development, all with mathematical equations. His idea was that what is important in development is not only to go beyond per capita income, to attack poverty and its causes, and especially, and this is the definition of development that we have to take into consideration, to give people choices. The more you have choices, the more developed you are. The less you have choices, the more underdeveloped you are, even at the individual level. If you have your back to the wall, you are stuck, and you have to accept whatever is suggested to you. And if you are a third world country, you know. I mean, I come from Egypt. We have a huge debate about what the IMF is imposing on Egypt. And I mean, I can come to that later if you are interested, because it is daily life. I mean, the rate of inflation is almost 50% or 55% on basic food stuff because of the IMF. Right? So The more you are stuck and you decisions are taken outside and you have no choice but to accept them, the less developed you are. Okay? So Mahbub al-Haq and Amartya Sen developed what we call HDI, Human Development Index. And the idea was to go beyond the per capita income to measure development and actually to use 3 indicators that became afterwards 4 indicators. And just before giving you the 4 indicators, one of my colleagues, when we started the Arab Human Development Report, said, let us exclude economics altogether, because per capita income has been misleading. We didn't go that far, but we reformulated the per capita income to use poverty as a measure. So, in the Human Development Index, you have level of poverty, education, health. These are the components of development. Then, UNDP, the UN care a lot about gender. They added inequality, gender inequality. Then some of us pushed a bit further and said, why do we have to keep it, to limit it to gender? Why don't we talk about inequality in general? So, the new definition of development, the Human Development Index, is based on 4 components: education, poverty, health, equality. Can come to that in detail afterwards. Let me now come to what we did in the Arab Middle East, counting on that, what I call revolution in development studies. We have advanced a lot from reducing development to a financial aspect of per capita income, simple and I would say simplistic, to much more common sense redefinition of development based on these 4 components. Okay. The UNDP came with a great idea. Said, what about producing a report about the Arab Middle East? They had, from time to time, national reports. Development in Egypt, development in Jordan, development in Saudi Arabia, but they didn't have really regional reports. And I think they started in Latin America, and then they had one on Sub-Saharan Africa, and then came to the Arab Middle East. Their idea was bright, because they said, we will finance everything, but we will count on local experts, people who know the region. And that was a fantastic combination, because many of the great minds don't have enough financial and organizational resources to do long-term research. UNDP solved this problem, and that was fantastic. And I'll talk about the price you pay in return for that. The UN is not as detached as we think they are. They also have their political views. And at a certain time, if you are an independent academic, you should know how to draw the line, not only with governments, but also with international organizations. And I have a lot of data about that. I'm mentioning that because I see lots of young people around, and they have to be warned about that. You have really to draw your red line and say, I'm an academic, I cannot just say whatever anybody who pays wants me to say. Right? So we started, and there have been 5 reports, and this one is the 6th one, 10th anniversary one. We started in 2002. And as I said, the recipe was a great recipe for success. You have good financial resources, good organizational resources. When I had my team and we had to meet, the UNDP did everything from booking the flights to accommodation to organization to translation if we needed translation. We just had to produce the academic work. And because they paid very well, we could really choose the best minds in the region. I was telling the students here last night, when I was working with that 10th anniversary report, for each chapter I was giving my colleagues $25,000 for a chapter. And if you have a colleague from Algeria or from Yemen, that is the salary of 2 or 3 years. Mm-hmm. It's a lot of money, but it allows you to be very demanding about the quality of what you receive. And even to ask the person who's writing the chapter to ask for research assistance if he or she wants. We had also the possibility to have what we call background papers. If I am working, say, on security or terrorism, I can ask one of the big experts on the subject to submit to me a background paper on the issue, and again pay him or her very well. So the infrastructure was very good. Infrastructure from all points of view, and if there is any delay or lack of quality, it is the expert who is responsible for it and not the organization, because you had all the different possibilities to produce a good work, right? So with all these advantages, and as I said, the disadvantages, what was the result? The result was obviously redefining development. Instead of per capita income, Human Development Index. And that is, I think, a big revolution in development studies. Number 2, in relation to the Arab world, and when I look at the 6 reports that we have produced, they come to about 1,800 pages. But it's not only the number of pages. I just tried to compile here the other aspects of the reports. We had about boxes that are quoting some people, like the Secretary General of the Arab League or an important Minister of Economics. We had 309 boxes. Figures, 234 figures. Tables, 261 tables. And number of background papers as the basis of these reports that you don't read, but you see the result, 177 background papers. I would say a huge data bank. Yeah. And I usually say to my students and junior colleagues, if really you are interested in the Arab Middle East, start with these reports. Read them. Different aspects. But that is the start. Let me just give you the titles of the different reports. The first one, 2002, Creating Conditions for Coming Generations. Second report, Knowledge Society and its Obstacles and Challenges. Third report, Freedom in the Arab World. Fourth report, empowerment of women, the idea of gender inequality. Fifth report, challenges of human security. And that's important. We think of security usually in purely military terms. We introduced here the idea of human security, and that is the basis. I can come again to that. And then the sixth report is sort of synthesis and coming back to raise the controversial issues and to talk about the future. And I was the lead author of that one. I was in the core team of the others, but I was responsible for this one. And then I can talk a lot in detail. I can talk for 2-3 hours about that, but I like very much to have a debate and listen to you. So the first problem that I found when trying to deal with the 10th anniversary one is that you have to give a synthesis of what happened. But at the same time, you cannot repeat what has been said. That's a waste of time. And that is actually a 22 difficult position. How to be fair to your colleagues, but at the same time, not to repeat what they said. And then I'll come to 1 or 2 examples that were nightmares and tell you about how I dealt with them. I had a great team, 8 people with me, and again I was telling the colleagues from the center here, it is an Arab Human Development Report. And even though I am Egyptian, I couldn't limit participants to Egyptians. In fact, I ended by excluding Egyptians, since I was Egyptian myself. And I had the CVs of what we thought were good researchers in the Arab world. UNDP was very good in that. And in the end, chose 8 people, 8 experts, and miraculously, they were 8 men and 4 men and 4 women. UNDP was very happy about that. But the most important thing is that women were not chosen because they were women. They were good. So it was a very good team, and I liked very much what the interaction I had with them. There are 2 copies of the report in the library. You can have a look. But let me talk to them about the paradigm of these 1,800 pages, this number of tables, the boxes, the data. First of all, our approach was not economic. It was what we call political economy. And that is the relationship between wealth and power. You cannot discuss. Power is the essence of politics. Wealth is the essence of economics. They cannot be separated. So how to bridge them? The bridge sometimes is good. When you talk about trade and its impact on society, or when you encourage investments. But sometimes it's not so good, like corruption. I can go on. Money laundering and the collusion of some people in high positions. So the idea then of political economy is how not to separate politics from economics. And this is what we call the political economy approach. Second thing is that we found that the Arab world suffers from what we called deficits, not only economic, deficit in knowledge, deficit in freedom, and deficit in equality. The different components of the Human Development Index. In the 10th anniversary report, we were even more provocative and said, in fact, we can go on and focus only on politics rather than economics. Resources are very important, but more important than the resources are how to use them, the policies you adopt. Countries like Singapore or Japan are poor in resources. Sierra Leone has lots of diamonds. Not to talk about the Congo. Lots of countries are resource rich. And what makes a difference? It's not the amount of resources, but the policies you adopt. And I use the term CNS, taking it from medicine, central nervous system. This is what actually accounts for development or lack of development. How the policy-making center deals with the challenges that you have, right? The report had 10 chapters. I can talk about the 10 chapters if there are questions, but as I said, you have the table of contents there. Let me talk just about two issues that caused some differences with the UNDP. One is about conflict. I said to the UNDP, okay, we have the Arab-Israeli conflict. We have US invasion of Iraq. We talked about that. And the media goes on talking about that. Shall we go on repeating? Dealing with that, isn't that a bit of waste of time? Money? Energy? So they said, what do you suggest? I said, inter-Arab conflicts. And they jumped. I said, but this is a reality. I mean, that was long ago, before the conflict between Qatar, Saudi Arabia, UAE, Bahrain and Egypt and all of that. I said, we look at history. Morocco and Algeria had a sort of border war 1 year after Algeria's independence. And we can go on, They finally accepted. And we have a chapter there that I think one of the very good chapters for somebody who is interested in strategic studies, because it talks about social cost of conflicts, not only military cost or economic cost, but social cost of conflict. The other issue that caused some problems was about education. Again, my colleagues have done a lot of good work on education. And actually the World Bank has produced a report in 2008, excellent one, about education. I felt we could not add very much. But at the same time, I had some sleepless nights. How can I produce a synthetic report about development without talking about education, the basis of development? And then, one of the nights, inspiration comes to you, and I went again to the UNDP, and I said, I have a solution. They knew that we were bothered about that. Not only me, but my colleagues in the team, and also the UNDP, to be fair to them. Said, yes, we need to deal with education. I said, I have read all these reports, what can I add? They have done their homework. It was very good, very well done. So I went to them and said, I have a suggestion. I said, what? I said, religious education. That has been marginalized, that has been neglected. We don't go into it, yet it is basic. All kids in all schools all over the Arab world, I don't know about Italy, I don't know about Europe, but all kids in the Arab world have religious lessons where they are told what religion, whether it is Islam or Christianity, is about. Not to talk about Israel, very religious state. And again, the UNDP was very worried. Said, knowing you, you will be critical about religious education. I said, rightly so. Said, we will be accused of being anti-Islamic, and our offices could be sacked. I said, we will be very, very professional about that. And we have 2 chapters. Actually, some of the best chapters I have seen about education, not only religious education. One by a Tunisian colleague, a female, who has done her PhD on education and teaches at the Faculty of Education about not only what the little kids have in primary school, but also how professors of religion behave with the kids, which sometimes negates the message. I mean, if the teacher goes on talking about how good religion is, how honest you have to be, how punctual you have to be, then the teacher comes late, message is lost on the kids. So that's one chapter, and I'm very proud of that chapter. The second chapter was about, by a Bahraini colleague, about the formation of imams and the priests. And these are very influential people. I mean, I might be a university professor and very specialist in my field. If I go to the countryside, they will listen more to an imam who might be half illiterate rather than to me. So they have a huge influence. And we have some content analysis of the Friday sermons and the Sunday sermons in that. And I think that was also a huge contribution to the debate.
If you agree, we could open the floor.
Yes, I'll just conclude
Yes.
saying that since we started before the Arab Spring, but ended actually after it, I have added a chapter at the end about the problems of transition. Once you have revolution, where to from there? And I reviewed the literature, criticized what we call transitology, and left the debate open, which I think we can leave it open now.
Thank you very much. Thank you very much. I think that it was very important that you pointed out the chapter after the Arab Spring, because I think that one of the main questions in everybody's mind watching the transition in the Arab world is what is its impact on the general development of these countries, and as you were saying, the transitology and what does it mean. So first of all, let me say that the book is on sale right now here, and it's at a special launch price. So instead of its full price, it's quite with your editor we have strategized with your publisher.
Oh, yeah, I didn't know that. Okay.
Yes, we have strategized with the publisher, so we do have the book for a special launch price, and it's just in the back of the room. I will now take the first 2 questions and then turn over the floor to the professor, and I will leave you just a second to go take my questions, but please show me a raise of hands for a question or comments. Okay, one here, and please.
Yeah, I just wanted to ask the professor, thank you for your lecture. very interesting. I feel that you're a very brave man that's willing to tackle even very sensitive areas, and especially in the Arab world where there's a lot of taboo about certain things. I was wondering if you could just give us a brief idea about the state of freedom in Egypt at the moment. Where are we now? And obviously, I gather from meeting you and hearing you that you are a free man in your mind, and you will say what you think. So, do you ever run into problems in that part of the world?
We probably don't have to wait for Cynthia to just step up for a second, please. I think you can answer directly.
I can answer that question right away. Yeah. We have, I'll come to a direct answer to your question, but just let me situate that issue. We have been working for the last 3 years with the European Union on a big research project about youth. Youth represents in the Arab world about 2/3 people from until age 29, and that's a huge component of society, not only for the present but for the future. And I was glad that the EU spent money on that. Actually, 2 big projects with about 4 million euros. The impression is that the Arab Spring was a youth aspect. And that's true. I mean, I went to Tahrir Square with my students. They spent the night there and all that. I would say that it was a sort of national revolt pioneered by young people. They were the active ones, and I don't want to go in detail unless there is really interest in that, but the situation now that evolved is not as good as they expected. In fact, in some aspects, it is worse than during the Mubarak era. Among the youth component, you have 3 groups. Ones that have been co-opted by the government. And again, I can talk a lot about that. I have the data. Some of my students. 2 that are in prison. Some are in prison, including the activists of 2011. Some of the media call them foreign agents, paid by the outside world. And number 3, some of the very bright minds are in exile abroad. So, situation is not as these young people expected. In some respects, it is worse. I can talk where to go from there, but if I have a question about that. Yeah. Risk for me personally? Yes. I mean, I had a talk we had a meeting at AUC, and there was a British colleague from Durham. She's a friend, and I was commenting on the situation, and then she took me aside and said, Bahgat, you don't have problems? I said, I owe it to my students to tell them what I think, based on data. Me as an academic, as a professor, I cannot cheat my students. Otherwise, I should leave my business. Up till now, I didn't have any problems. They might come, but up till now, I mean, there might be issues that I don't know about. My telephone might be censored, might be. But up till now, I travel a lot. I go out and inside airports, and I don't feel anything. One case, I used to write an article in the newspaper in Haram every 2 weeks. one of my articles was censored. And I said, I don't accept that, I'm not going to write there. But it didn't go beyond that. Okay? So I am one of the lucky ones, I would say. Does that answer your two questions?
Yes, yes, totally. Thank you.
I have a question myself. I would have tons, but I will limit to one. In the meantime, after that, I will open the floor back to the audience. So my question is, I think you rightly point out the importance of inequality. And to my knowledge, I think there is only one index that tries to measure inequality, which is the Gini index. I was wondering, what do you think about this metric, and do you think there is a better one, or it can be measured differently?
Yeah, okay. Gini index limits itself to income, to the financial aspect. And that is my big reservation.
Yeah.
Two aspects that I think development studies have to deal with. Poverty is not only a financial aspect. In fact, poverty reproduces itself. I see around me that families are divided in sending their kids to schools. Some go on sending them to governmental schools, which are bad. Governmental schools, no education. I'm a product of governmental schools, but that's some time ago. Now, private schools are the only schools that are there, and very expensive, right? And hence, education actually becomes a reflection of a class society. It reproduces a class divided society. Kids that, my students that come from the American university, they can go anywhere and compete, and kids who come from provincial university, and sometimes even their language is not there. So that is one big reservation about Gini index. The other one, and that is, I would like some reactions about that from the audience. The debate about inequality is not only about income inequality. People who are fair know that you have differences in society. If you are university educated, you should have higher salary than if you are not educated. The debate about inequality is about justice. How do you get, when you are rich, how did you get that money? How did you become rich? Gini index doesn't talk at all about that. So inequality has to be associated not only with income levels, but much more, and especially with the issue of the source of income you get. And
Thank you.
there we get into corruption, justice, and all of that.
Thank you. So we have a question here and two questions there. And one in the front as well.
Can I start?
Yes.
Good morning, Professor. Thank you for your presentation. I'm Colonel Bonsignor from the Naval Defense College, the head of the Middle East faculty. I'm very much interested in your book, and I will propose that the school will buy it. I have a couple of questions, but I will limit myself to one. Development is closely linked to the government.
The what?
The form of government, and apparently in the Arab world, the form of government that works well is the model, the Al-Sisi model, or the Haftar model, what many looks at for the solution of the Libyan crisis. But this model doesn't work very much with development. We know. Do you have any research on this in your book?
Broadly speaking, I think maybe how much, just not to go into politics too much, maybe how much, the form of institutional politics impacts development, and if democracy or autocracy is better.
Okay, we'll take other questions.
Yes, I think it's best. Please, here in the front. Oh, so yes, sorry. The lady in the back first. Yes, yourself.
Because I appreciate the Gini index, okay, also because it was my colleague at the University of Bologna. But today, the best index, the global index, is the OECD index. It's named Better Life Index.
Better
because
Life
it
Index.
includes all many aspects. And also, United Nations are changing time to time their index because life is changing. Many issues are arising, and then they are contacting these new issues. And then I have another question, probably okay?
No, please, go on.
It was the first question before speaking about Gini, because Professor has spoken about religious education, but you have to remember that in the 16th century in Europe, we had 100 years of religious war. And then if Christian education is one thing, one education for religious or for Christian people in Europe, for example, it's not the same education for people living in Africa, living in Asia, living in other countries, because it's not considered an education. If you think about the situation in Israel, when we have three religions staying together, people staying together, they are killing every day each other. The situation in Israel, in Jordan, is incredible, dangerous. Instead of speaking about, instead of this adjective, I propose an inclusive, all-inclusive adjective is civic education, in order to respect each other independently from religion.
Yes.
Because religion, even Christians have killed people in China, for example, in Africa, have killed in South America too.
In the name of religion.
For religion,
Yeah,
Christians
sure.
have killed South American indigenous people in
Yeah.
the 16th century.
Sure.
Since you've been working on development in the Arab world for the last 20 years or maybe more, what have you found in your book or in your latest studies that was the most surprising to you?
The most
Surprising.
tough question. Okay, I'll take the questions in the order I got. Concerning the form of government, we have invented in the Arab world a new word, because the Arab world is divided between monarchies and republics. But we have seen actually that republics are not very different from monarchies. I mean, Hafiz al-Assad gave Syria to his son after he passed away. Mubarak was preparing to, and we use the term for people who are Arabic speaking here, we use a new term called Gumluka. That's a mixture of monarchies and republics, because there isn't much difference. If I, after doing that work, if I want a solution beyond the regime, I would say emphasis should be on local councils. Start development from the bottom and activate the local councils. And the regimes have to back off. Regimes try to control everything down to the bottom. Back off and let people deal with their problems. They know best how to deal with these problems. So that is, whether it is monarchy or a republic, there isn't much difference between the two. Some monarchies are much more liberal. Morocco is much more liberal than many republics. Right? The question about Better Life Index, I think, the question there, I have put, let me perhaps make some publicity for what we are doing at AUC at present. We are developing a huge data bank with 44 variables for all the countries of the Middle East from 1970 until 2015. I'll give information about the data bank here at the center for you to plug in, because it is free. You can plug in and see. We actually developed it as a teaching tool. I wanted my students, when they talk about the Middle East, they talk data, not generalities. But it is becoming much more universal now, and people are using it. And the idea, since data collection is so expensive, what we did, we went through the different data banks that exist in the world, and we tried to be like a central bank, have all these indicators there and have their data. So yes, there is the Better Life Index, but there is also the Misery Index, and that is the Kano Institute. There is the Happiness Index, right? So there are lots of indexes. The one that we use a lot, and this is related to the regime and the political aspect, is the F state index. F not in the usual sense of F, but fragile failed state index, and the governance index. And
the governance index, the World Bank.
That's right. The 12 indicators there, and that are very, very popular and very useful. So indexes, as I said, we have about 44. We are using them. Go and consult them and give us feedback, because this is how we can improve it. Religious education, and we better do without religious education, if I understood the question properly.
Yes.
We better do without religious education. I think socially it is impossible. Let me just give you a personal note here. My two daughters were born in Canada, and when they were in school, my wife was British, and when they went to school, we had to face up to the question of religion. And we asked our two daughters to go into the civic education class, not a religion class. But this is in Canada, not in Israel or Egypt. There, you can be lynched if you criticize religion. So you have to deal, and the UNDP was very worried about that. You have to deal with the issue of religion very tactfully and intelligently. Rather than excluding religion, I would like very much to emphasize how the different religions converge. All religions have tolerance. All religions talk about peace. All religions talk about honesty. Why do we have to choose the Salafi aspect of conflict, differences, and fighting? I think that might be a much better strategy and acceptable one than just excluding religion. Your question, what was surprising for me? I think the level of poverty surprised me a lot. I knew that some of our people are poor, but I didn't expect that level of poverty, and especially the multidimensional aspect of poverty, is that poverty reproduces itself. Poor people have poor kids, and it goes on. That was the thing that surprised me a lot and depressed me.
Thank you. We have time for a final round of questions. So if you have comments to share, do it now. Thank you. So we have Diego, then behind him, and anybody else here and there. Okay, that's fine. Diego, go first, please.
Correct. Thanks very much for your presentation. I would like you to tell us a bit more about your take on political transitions in the word? And another question I have for you relates to the fact that it has already emerged during the debate. The Arab world, in fact, presents a great many differences. I mean, within this big regional group that we call the Arab world, we see a lot of differences in terms of income, in terms of demographics, population. Some leaders, such as Saudi Arabia, are considered influential on a global level, other not. I mean, there's a lot of sectarian, all these kind of differences that we observe when we focus a bit more on the Arab world. So my question is, how do these differences affect the Arab world prospects in terms of regional development? Thanks very much.
Yes. Thank you very much. It was very interesting. And I wanted to ask you one question specifically related to fundamentalism. I wanted to ask you, if in your studies, while you were collecting data and analyzing the different situation, you found that religious fundamentalism was an aspect important in relation to development. It has some influence on it. And how much do you think it has prevented you from your research in general? Do you think is it relevant? Does it influence the possibility of finding new data and analyze the situation in different Middle Eastern countries?
The question is very simple, and is about the influence and the effects in terms of development of the oil price crisis in the region that affected in the first time in history countries like Saudi Arabia and other Gulf countries, and also Algeria in North Africa. How do you think this crisis made a sort of forced transformation of the government, like in Saudi Arabia that made a lot of reform in terms of economics and politics?
We'll go for the final question, but also, there's another one. Okay, so we'll go first for the lady in the front row, and then to you, sir. I think if you'd like to continue chatting with the professor and with one another, you're most welcome to stay. After this final answer, we will have a light snack. We will have some pizza, some salty snacks. We have a traditional Egyptian sweet, also for in honor of our professor. So you're most welcome to stay with us. So the lady, and then
thank you. Yes, my question is simple too, and I guess a bit general.
I worry about simple questions.
No, simple, and I'm very interested, first of all, in your talk. It was very interesting. And secondly, I'm interested in IR theory, and you said you're a professor in international relations. And I remember when I was a student in the UK, IR theory, I also would always enter into conflict with the strongest paradigm that is obviously very powerful in academia, which is the realist school of thought. And when it comes to especially the Arabs or Muslims, or not Muslims but Arabs, in any case, and you try to explain the situation in the Middle East, even by using all these indexes, and I even read that report actually because I was working on a paper, and it was very interesting. And what shocked me was the demasculinization of men in the Middle East, and how that kind of would create violence in Arab societies, because of unemployment, etc. I thought that was really shocking and really true. But what causes all these problems in the Middle East is obviously cannot be separated from the political, from this bigger umbrella, which is the political dynamics that exist between the superpower, or I don't know what you want to call, because you mentioned Syria, for example. What are the reasons? I mean, sectarian, it's not even controlled by the people. So we know as Arabs that the situation in the Middle East, and here we're talking only about Arabs, but of course Israel is right in the heart of the Arab world. And so how can we separate, how can we talk about all these things without getting into politics? Especially if you think about, you know, IR theory, how can we resolve, you know, our issues in the Middle East without actually tackling all these bigger problems that we have that are political and that have to do with IR theory, with realism, power politics, security based not on human security but only exclusively on military security, and how can you resolve all the problems that we have?
Thank you.
That's not a simple question.
No.
And the final question.
Thank you. Thank you, Professor, for your presentation. I would like to know, you highlighted about Central and Africa for problems for development, especially in the countries of the index like Uganda, Congo, and the others. Only that. You like this?
Okay. The question about differences between the Arabs, you are absolutely right. I mean, in many conferences I say, guys, you look at the Arabs as a bloc, and I'm guilty of overgeneralization because in the 20 minutes or 30 minutes I talk about the Arabs. And when we were dealing with the Arab Human Development Report, we had to face up to that. I mean, my colleagues coming from North Africa, coming from Lebanon, coming from the Gulf, we were over-conscious of the differences that divide us personally, right? I mean, we have in the Arab world the haves and the have-nots, right? The Qatari, his per capita income is 50 times the Yemeni, 50 times. In terms of demographics, the native population of Qatar is not even one district of Cairo. My Kuwaiti colleagues were about to beat me up because I said Egypt produces a Kuwait every 9 months in terms of population. Huge differences. I have a student doing his thesis with me about the Gulf. That might be interesting for you.
Definitely.
Just to show the differences among Gulf countries, because we look at them as a block. And he's taking Bahrain and the UAE, right? So these differences are there, and you know, we can spend a semester talking about that, about the differences. But in the 20 minutes, I go on. What is the major aspect that regroups all the Arabs? Unfortunately, authoritarian political system. All of them, despite differences in demographics, money, culture, look at any of the systems. Different degrees of democratization if we are nice to them, or of authoritarianism. So there is, and since I am emphasizing the political aspect of development, that was God sent to us. Right. Fundamentalism, did it prevent me from research? No. No, I talk to the sheikhs and the priests with respect, even if I'm not convinced, and put them on the spot. And many of them actually in private conversations are very open and nice, and fantastic sense of humor. I learn a lot from them. I didn't have any bad experiences. Let me just tell you 2 things about religion and what we have gone through. Even though it is not really my field, when I read the memoirs of many religious leaders of the Muslim Brotherhood, and that comes to your question about surprise, I was appalled how strong the Islamic organizations are. They take people from young age through summer camps. They marry people among themselves. They get into business among people. It becomes an iron organization. If you want to get out, you have to leave the country, because you cut off all family and business relationships. Huge impact. Number two, if there is any new things that we have learned from the Arab Spring, is that the Muslim organizations, first of all, reached power by ballot and not bullet through elections. Then they failed dismally. They failed. I mean, that is my daily life from 2011 to 2013 with the Muslim Brotherhood. I met the president of the Muslim Brotherhood, president of the Republic, Morsi. He didn't have much idea how to deal with the basic problems. Islam is the solution is an empty slogan. How do you deal with unemployment, traffic problems, electricity cut by applying Islam? Didn't I can, that's a book. I can talk about decision making at that level. But basically to your question, I didn't have any problems. Oil prices and crisis. You probably know that we have a very influential theory in economics called the resource curse. You know that, and it's very controversial. Is that you are unlucky if you are rich, right? I mean, we can discuss that. But the question of Algeria is the right one. The Algerian system is built on social benefits. Once the revenue goes down and you don't have the social benefits, then all the problems come up. And they came up in 1988. Algeria went through very hard period between 1988 and 1992. Saudi Arabia is now reworking a lot about post-oil system, but they are already imposing some taxes, selling part of Aramco. I think they realize that oil and the rentier state is not here forever. And that brings us to the main question of this report. Policies are the main things that can either save the Arab world or doom it. Right? Realism, we'll take that. I love that. With my students, we debate. I was actually talking with Mr. Belfer because he worked on alliances, and I said that one of the most important books about international relations by a professor at Harvard, Stephen Walt, absolutely, we communicate, has tried to reformulate realism by saying that alliances don't depend on balance of power, but on what he called bandwagon. That you go with the strong rather than going with the weak to balance. So there's a lot to talk about realism. But let me, for the sake of time, just take the issue related to the Arab world. We have some of these dialectics that drain us in the Arab world. Drain us. Analysts and mass media and everything. And this is related to your question. One of them is obviously about religion. The other one is about, and this is related to Africa, the misery of the Arab world. Who is responsible for it? Imperialism and external factors, or domestic? And it becomes a war. So if you are in a meeting, people can beat each other up and say you are an agent, or you are sold out, or you are in with the regime. In the report, we came slightly in favor of the domestic dimension. The regimes are responsible. When I was a student, we had the theory about dependency. Everything was the result of imperialism. But this is, guys, this is 30 years ago. What, in the 30 years, what did the regimes do to restructure the situation, right? So, in a research project, I developed the idea of intermestics. And intermestics doesn't exist in the English language. Intermestics is the first 4 terms of international, and mystic, the last 5 letters of domestic. The idea of you cannot discuss the problems of the Arab world or of Africa either internally or externally, but the interaction between the two that you have to deal with. So that is my take on realism and the rest, but we can pick that up. The last question about Africa, and I mean, I've been to Africa a lot, and I was honored by being given an award after Ali Mazroui has passed away, who was the greatest African political scientist. The problems are very similar. Problems across the South, despite the differences, and the differences are much bigger than within the Arab world, are very similar when I talk with my African colleagues. The similarity for me, and that is perhaps convenient to finish on that for a talk in Rome about the refugee and migration crisis. And the data I have, in 2016, one displaced person, that means either outside or inside, in Africa and the Middle East, every second, one displaced person. 30 million people have migrated or tried to migrate, 7 million from the Middle East and Sub-Saharan Africa. Some of them never made it, as we know. I think that it is a pity that we finish on a negative message, a negative tone, but it seems to me if we diagnose the problems well, we deal with them well. If you go to a doctor and makes a mess of your eye diagnosis, certainly he or she will give you the wrong medicine. So I'm sorry that I gave you a negative message, but perhaps we hope for the future.
Thank you very much.